Well, good evening, everyone. As we begin, I'll ask that all present please silence cell phones and other electronic devices, and of course remind council that the use of such devices is prescribed in our procedure by law. And I'll call this meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. by recognizing the traditional keepers of this land and specifically our neighbors of the Alderville First Nation with a formal territorial acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the Municipality of Brighton is located on the Mississauga-Anishinaabe territory and is the traditional territory of the Mississauga. The Council of the Municipality of Brighton recognizes that the Mississauga Nations are the collective stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. Moving into the approval of the agenda, I have a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that Council approve the February 3rd, 2025 Council agenda as amended to remove the delegation from Amy McQuaid 8.2 and the deferred motion under unfinished business 13.1. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Being not opposed, that motion is carried. Members of council, have you any declarations of pecuniary interest? And if so, please state the general nature thereof. There are none noted. Are there any announcements this evening? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone. I recently attended the 2025 Roma conference in Toronto, held from January 19th to the 21st. It was an incredible experience with a dynamic trade show and an informative program. One of the highlights was the opening keynote for Cartel Herbert, who delivered an inspiring and inciting speech. The event provided a valuable network opportunity and discussing. I thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other announcements? Councillor Wheeldon?
That reminds me that I'm going to Fredericton next week for the FCM Sustainable Communities Conference. And so I look forward to sending you back lots of good information about how we can become more sustainable.
Anyone else? Brings us to the adoption of the minutes. It's moved by Councillor McCausland, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that Council adopt the January 13th, 2025 meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor. If you would be so kind as to give me just a couple of minutes. I would just like to make a few more comments on the January 13th council meeting regarding COU 2025-15. Diversity and inclusion go beyond sexual orientation and gender identity. They encompass the rich tapestry of our ethnic and racial backgrounds, our cultural and religious beliefs, mental abilities and disabilities, and the historical events that shape us. As a lifelong resident of Brighton, I have witnessed firsthand the remarkable strides we have made in building a community that embraces this diversity. Together, we have woven a new, vibrant fabric that is Brighton. However, I believe that there are moments when our decisions reflect only a narrow perspective, and we fail to consider the full scope of what is best for everyone. Our mayor frequently acknowledges Brighton's demographic makeup, but it is essential that we take this acknowledgement further, ensuring that every decision we make reflects the diverse voices and needs of our entire community, not just a selected few. Brighton's support for the LGBTQ plus community through actions like flag raising, creating inclusive spaces like the Rainbow Crosswalk, participating in marches and vigils, and financially supporting organizations like the Rainbow Youth Center, it is commendable. As well, our Main Street supports the community as well with the purchase of a rainbow bench and, of course, symbols in these shops on Main Street. But inclusivity cannot stop there. Let us extend the same level of support and commitment to other often unrepresented communities, whether they are ethnic minorities, those with disabilities, or people from different cultural and religious backgrounds. In making decisions, we must prioritize the well-being of every individual of Brighton. Let us continue to build a community where all voices are heard, all histories are valued, and all people, regardless of their identity, feel seen and supported.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. Anyone else on the minutes? All those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. And a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wright, the council adopt the January 24th, 2025 special council meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could have a couple more minutes, please. I would like to make a few comments regarding the special council meeting of January 24. Please note that these comments are absolutely not intended to challenge the decision made by this council regarding motion SPC 2025-2. Since the 24th, I have heard from many residents, and those conversations have solidified my concerns about the process, or should I say the lack of process or alternative processes on making these very important decisions. Again, this is not about the decision, but the process or lack of. In the days leading up to the special meeting, I asked both staff and some of my colleagues about a process. It was clear that most of us really did not have a clear understanding of how this process would work. At the beginning of the meeting, I put forth an addition to the agenda to talk about a process option. Granted, I used the word anonymous, and the mayor corrected me, but we didn't discuss an identified ranked voting process. It was disallowed. It just wasn't discussed as a process. In my opinion, the process we followed was flawed. After listening and questioning all the prospective candidates, it was evident that any one of the 9 were capable of filling the vacant seat. What was missing was an opportunity to deliberate the applicant on their merits, each applicant on their merits. Each one should have been given fair and equal consideration. Beginning after the break with a motion instead of a period of deliberation, it was a missed opportunity and confusing to me and probably many others. After listening to one councillor explain his interpretation of important qualities, it was evident that youth would be the most important criteria. In my mind, this immediately took the remaining 8 out of consideration. I believe that the 13,000 plus residents of Brighton who have entrusted this council to make well-informed, balanced, fair, and sound decisions were let down. Whether those decisions are deliberated in an open or closed meeting setting is irrelevant. We did not have an opportunity to discuss the other 8 candidates. I do not believe that having a frank and candid discussion behind closed doors to weigh the merits of each candidate would have been contrary to this process. In my opinion, we have done not only a disservice to our community by making this decision in haste, we have done a disservice to the applicants who put their names forward for consideration, but also to ourselves as a council who has prided itself in being thorough and conscientious in our decision-making. Again, I am disappointed in how we made our decision, not necessarily the decision itself. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to entertain debate on the motion on that fact. We're only dealing with the meeting minutes, and I'm sure many of us want to engage in debate at this stage, but I'm not going to permit it. I will say that the process was not flawed. The process was provided to us in a report from staff, which we accepted and moved forward with. That was the process we chose. It was validated by the Municipal Act and under the rules that we are governed by the province. And to go into closed session, I would suggest, would have violated the process that we set out with, which was to be open, transparent, and accountable throughout the whole process. My understanding was that council did not want to proceed into a closed session to have these discussions. So, and that opportunity was never asked for. At no point was a motion put on the floor to enter into a closed session in that meeting, or I would have entertained it. Any further discussion on the minutes? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. A motion moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Butwell, that Council adopt the January 27th, 2025 Council Planning Meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. We have no statutory public meeting this evening, which brings us to delegations and presentations. Council will hear one presentation this evening. The presenter has 15 minutes to provide council with their information, although sometimes that runs longer. So we will at our discretion increase that, given that it's the auditor and we probably want to hear what the auditor has to say. It is noted that language, content, and conduct must always remain respectful. Council will be provided with an opportunity to ask questions of clarification from the presentation representative based on the information they have presented. Council is reminded that this is not an opportunity to engage in debate with the presenter, nor advance a public policy position. Presenters are reminded that Council does not make decisions during the presentation portion of tonight's meeting. And I will turn the floor over to Richard Steiginga from Baker and Tilley.
Right. Good evening, everyone. I hope you can all hear me okay.
We can hear you fine.
All right, good. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Unfortunately, due to the weather, we weren't able to attend in person. And with me tonight is the audit manager on the job, Matthew Birney, sitting across from me. And as well, too, just keep in mind that I am filling in for the audit partner, Joanna Park, who was not able to make it. So and fortunately for the rest of you, I will not be going through the full 92 pages of our agenda document. So I will just be running through the last part of the document within the agenda, which is the presentation part that I'm hoping you can all see on screen right now.
Yes, we can see your shared screen.
Okay, good. All right, good. So yes, tonight I'm here to present the audit results and as well as some financial highlights for the Municipality of Brighton for the year ended December 31st, 2023. Keep in mind the 2023 year end did include a number of significant changes for PSAB reporting. I will highlight those as we go through. But of course, that work did require some additional work from your staff, so that will be noted. And as a result, then it did just take some additional time to get everything completed and presented here in the report you see tonight. First off, I will start with the independent auditor's report. The auditor's report is a two-page document that is consistent with the prior years. So what we do here is we pull out the opinion paragraph, the important paragraph of the auditor's report. And we're pleased to say that in our opinion, the accompanying consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the Municipality of Brighton at December 31st, 2023, and the results of its operations and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards, more commonly known as PSAB. So that is your standard clean unqualified auditor's reports. Keep in mind, though, when we say consolidated, the numbers that we look at include both the municipalities' results as well as the results of the library and the business improvement area, and the PSAB reporting standards. That is just the way that you are required to report under the Municipal Act, which is different than how you budget. So I will try to point out those differences moving forward. Next, just provide you some of the audit procedures that we do to gather the evidence to produce our auditor's reports. So there's some of the items listed there. So we do look at your minutes, open and closed, looking at your substantive. We also do substantive testing, looking at the flow of information and looking at that by way of sampling, analytical review, looking at management estimates. And then as well, too, we look at the various streams related to how your money comes in, being your revenues, and how it goes out in disbursements and payroll, and how you adjust things by way of journal entries. Next, the audit is is complete pending council approval of the financial statements, receipt of signed representation letter, as well as receipt of the legal letters back from your lawyers that have been sent. Overall, there were no difficulties encountered during the audit plan. It just, as I said earlier, with the new sections, it did take longer than was anticipated, just that due to the additional work, but there were no changes to our plan or disagreements or difficulties with management, and good cooperation from them, and then as well with the additional audit procedures for asset retirement obligations and financial instruments. There was some additional time and gathering of information that needed to be audited subsequently to get that recorded in your books. And as we will see in the numbers a little later, that you have a new liability this year for slightly over $2 million in relation to asset retirement obligations for the closure of your gravel pits, as well as some asbestos in some of your facilities. So under the asset retirement obligation, that's what that section was looking for, that you're required now to report those liabilities associated with the assets that you have. And so therefore, in your case, it was mainly related to your gravel pits and the required closure under the agreements for your licenses. For those pits, there was 4 of them, as well as I said, some asbestos in your facilities. And then next as well, just final note here on there were 2 audit differences within your financial statements. They do relate entirely to capital asset related items, and the net difference on those items was $45,000, which is well below materiality. So we're not asking for any type of adjustment there. We are just making you aware of that difference. So that's where the audit currently sits. And now I'll just lead you through some of the numbers. And so when we take a look at these slides, these are pulled right out of the financial statement. So when we're taking a look at the next slide here, it identifies your financial assets. And under PSAB, financial assets are assets that are either cash or will be turned into cash. You can see there overall slight decrease in your total financial assets. That does relate to the fact that you did have a fair bit of capital spending this year. So therefore, the monies you'd set aside in the past have been some of them have been utilized, causing your cash balances to go down. Your accounts receivable, there was a fair bit of increase there, and that's receivable for your ICIP grant for your Main Street water distribution. The federal and provincial governments owed you about $777,000 for that, causing that increase. Your taxes receivable, nice to see that dollar-wise they went down in 2023, and as a percentage of the total levy, you're about 8.8%, down from 9.7% in the prior year, which still puts you in the low risk range as determined by the ministry. So that's where you want to be, and so hopefully you can remain in that position. This year you had some additional inventory for resale in relation to the columbarium, and then as well too you still have your industrial land that you're for resale, so those are your assets held for resale. So $17.8 million in total financial assets. And then as well too, you can see the 5-year chart of that. And of course, cash being your largest financial asset, which is ideal, so it's available for use. Next, we can see that you have your financial liabilities. So these are the amounts you owe to others with the capital activity going on during the year. Your payables were up, as well to some deposits and developer funds held in trust also increased, causing the increase in accounts payable and accrued liabilities. Your deferred revenue obligatory reserve fund, so that's something unique to PSAB. So these are monies you've collected for development charges, parkland, and Canada Community Building Fund. So you've received the cash. You just haven't recorded it as revenue because you haven't spent it in accordance with the various legislation that goes along with that. So you can see there you were up about a little less than 200,000. You were able to increase the amount to be carried forward in your CCBF into 2024. Your deferred revenue, that represents your OCIF. You were able to continue to pay down your long-term debt as was required under those debt agreements. And then now you can see the impact of the asset retirement obligations. You can see there a little over $2 million of the new liability in relation to the gravel pits, and as well of about $1,946,000 and $144,000 in relation to asbestos cleanup in 9 various buildings throughout the municipality. So you can see there that you're about $20.7 million in liabilities at the end of the year. And next you can see there the 5-year, the 4-year trend on that. And as well too, here you can see the 4-year trend on your net financial assets. You can see there the biggest thing pushing you more in the red this year was about the $2 million asset retirement obligation. And that's the main reason why the change from 2022 to 2023. And as well too, the fact that you were able to increase your tangible capital assets, which is not a financial asset. It appears here on the next page being your non-financial assets. So you can see there the significant increase in your tangible capital assets, more than $10 million increase during the year, and that's a combination of additions as well as some assumed capital assets from some subdivisions that came on line that you assumed during the year. So that's $92.5 million, and as well too, you have some prepaids and inventories of supplies. So in total, then you had your bottom line there of $89.6 million in accumulated surplus. And then this graph here shows you where you spent your actual $8.6 million in cash tangible capital additions this year. You can see there that majority of it relates to both water and sewer and roads and bridges. And as well, there were some items there that were in progress at the end of the year, like the Wall Street and the Harbor Street in roads and bridges. You also did Carmen Road and Applewood Drive and Loyalist Drive, and the water and sewer additions relate to the Harbor Street pumping station and the water main work there. As well too, you acquired some land for a potential new building. You spent some money on pickleball courts for land improvements. Buildings include additions include a new roof at the community center, and as well too, the equipment and machinery includes fire equipment and self-contained breathing apparatus, and then as well too, the vehicle includes a new pumper. So those are the actual outlay of cash additions this year. In total, you will see here then on this graph, though, it's showing that you had $14 million in TCA additions, and then this bar includes both the cash additions of the 8.6 as well as the almost $6 million in assets you assumed in relation to properties and developments that were turned over to the municipality. Next, we come to the schedule of accumulated surplus, and this here to me is the most important slide within the slide deck. This help explains why you do not have about $89.6 million in your bank account, because of course a lot of that is invested in your capital assets, your roads, your buildings, in water and sewer infrastructure. So that's why you can see there that's almost $80 million net asset retirement obligations and your long-term debt. At the end of the year, the municipality did have an operating surplus of about $935,000 that historically would have been transferred to reserves in the subsequent year. The library board and the BIA still have operating surpluses at the end of the year, and then as well you still have a deficit in relation to your inventory held for resale for the cemetery operations. And then so that takes about 80.5 million. And then what's left is your reserve and reserve funds. So these are monies you can utilize moving forward. And you can see there that those amounts did decrease, and they were utilized in 2023 to fund capital additions. And next, you can see the 4-year trend on your reserve and reserve funds. Next, we come to the consolidated statement of operations. And this is a quick highlight of the schedule. And you can see there that within the budget column, you can see there that under PSAB, you're showing a surplus both in actual and within the budget. And of course, when you budget, you do not budget for a tax rate surplus. So items such as capital additions need to be funded through there. But then, of course, within the numbers are amortization, as well too. Things like long-term debt payments are not considered an expense. So those type of things, as well as transfers to and from reserve funds, are all items that are items that that are different between PSAB and how you budget internally. And those items are all then, when they get reflected, do bring things back to zero. And I guess the one thing to point out is this year, when you look at your annual surplus, it is quite high. And that's a lot of that does relate to the $6 million in the assumed assets you did acquire, as well as the one unique thing as well under PSAB, your grants that you had for OCIF and the water main project. You report the revenue in 2023, but the expense doesn't hit until you depreciate those assets. So having a large surplus one year it is quite normal in the PSAB world, and then in a year where you would not have a lot of capital grants or funding, and you have the amortization, then that number will flip around the other way. So next, you can take a look at your financial activities, your revenues. This comes straight out of the draft financial statements. Your municipality, like a lot of others, have seen both their in 2023 their supplementaries be significantly higher than their write-offs, higher than in past years, causing the variance there in your taxation, your user charges. About 4.3 million of the 5.8 is related to water and sewer, as well as building permits of 400,000 and your rec facilities. So those are some of the major components in that line item. Your government of Canada, about 700,000 of that relates for the water main. Your $2.5 million in your province of Ontario is about 600,000 for the water main and 600,000 for OCIF, as well as $1.1 million for your OMPF. As well too, you will see here the just because of rates and the amount of cash you had available, your investment income was significantly higher than budget, as well too some donations you had from prior years. You utilized this year for the Smithfield playground with the school board. And now you will see that the almost $6 million in contributed capital assets, and that then relates to a number of, I believe it was 3 subdivisions, Hamilton Woods, Tackaberry, and as well Tackaberry Ridge East and the Roslyn Estates. So those are the numbers being brought in that number there, causing that major variance between budget and actual. And then as well too, you utilized development charges and Canada Community Building Fund for capital projects during the year, giving a total of revenue of about $29.3 million. And next you will see the pie chart of that for 2023. Next you will see where your money went to. So then this schedule is broken down by the type. General government or administration items as well was slightly was over budget, and in relation to consulting and additional costs there, as well as some internal charges weren't as high as budgeted. Protection services, that includes both your fire and your OPP, as well as contributions to the Conservation Authority. Your building inspection services are the major components there, and they were just slightly over budget, and there some of that amortization was higher than budgeted with the additional capital additions for fire. The amortization was higher as well too. For transportation services, amortization was higher, as well as some material costs were coming in higher, creating a variance there. Environmental services, there were some operational items, larger items like the sewer lagoon sludge dredging was in the budget that did not occur, as well as some work valve replacements in the water. So those two items account for about $1.1 million of items that were in the budget that didn't occur. Health services relates for physician recruitment, medical, as well as the cemetery operations, and recreation and culture includes your recreational services, of course, the operations of the arena, as well as the library board and other cultural items coming in slightly higher, and amortization is one of the main ones there. And your planning and development includes the BIA and fairly close to budget on that line item there. So your total expenses were $19.9 million, being a little less than budget. And the following slide just gives you the various breakdowns, and like a lot of lower tier municipalities, transportation services is the largest one, and in your case too, with your larger water and sewer system. Environmental services is high, as well as protection services for both fire and policing. And then when you take a look at it, the expenses in another format, you will see there the type of expenses. Salaries and benefits were up from the prior year, but below budget. Materials and were a little less. So certain things, as mentioned already, the lagoon sludge removal, as well as the water valve replacement. Those items were budgeted in the materials lines, and it did not happen. Contracted services, the largest component in there is the OPP contract, and as well to external transfers were higher, and those were payments made out to others, including the grant for the Smithfield playground equipment, and as well too, as I mentioned earlier, you will see there that amortization was higher, about $600,000 from the budget, so that caused some of the variance in the other line items, and as well with some disposal of some capital assets, there was a loss on that line item there. And then you will see there the segmented information presented there, and as like most municipalities, salaries and benefits are the largest component, as that's how you deliver most of your services with your staff. So, and that is a summary of where things ended up at the end of 2023 for the municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Steiginga. We appreciate your presentation. Are there any questions of clarification from members of council? Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor. Page. Give me 2 minutes. I got to find it.
So while Councillor Rowley is looking for that, Mr. Steiginga, would you say that our audit was quote clean?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. You do have a clean audit opinion as highlighted in the first slide of the presentation. So that, although not specifically stated there, that is a clean audit opinion.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor. Page 17 of the presentation, I would just like a bit of a clarification on what other municipalities means.
All
Is
right.
that-
So that would be revenue you recognize from another municipality. And in your situation, that relates to some work you did on the Crammy Boundary Road, and they provided you money to provide that maintenance.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you for that. Thank you both. Anyone else? Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate the presentation and the work you do to make sure we're doing things right at the end of the day.
Thank you.
I have a motion moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Rowley, that Council receive the presentation from Richard Steiginga along with Matt Birney, Baker Tilly regarding the audit of the consolidated financial statements of the municipality of Brighton. Is there any discussion? Councillor Rowley?
I just have one more question for Mr. Steiginga regarding the audits for both the library and the DBIA. Will we be getting those soon too?
Mr. Steiginga?
Yes, once we get the documents back as noted here for the consolidated financial statements, then they'll be provided when we issue the consolidated statements as well.
Thank you both. Councillor Wheeldon?
Thank you. Just looking at chart on page 19 or 18 of the presentation, notice the property taxation is 41.6% of revenues. And I would just be, I don't know who I'm saying this to, but I would be curious to see how that number has shifted over time.
I suspect we would need to ask staff to provide us with that. CAO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Wheeldon, when you say overtime, what are you looking for?
I'm just wondering how much of our revenues have come from property taxation historically compared to today, because we hear about things such as provincial downloading and rises in user fees and things like that. And I'm thinking in terms of our own budget process that we've been going through, thinking where our money comes from is quite important as well. And it just struck me looking at these charts today. That I don't know what it's looked like for the last, was it different 20 years ago? I don't know.
CAO?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Wheeldon, are you looking for a 20-year? I'm not sure how far we can go back. I will certainly take a look for you and see what I can bring. If it's 20 years that you're looking for, I can try to see if we can go back that far. And
It's really a point of curiosity. If as far back as you're able to easily go,
Okay.
that would be lovely.
sure, thank you.
Thank you. I think it would be a curiosity as well to see where things are trending. And of course, we have that weird phase a couple of years ago where who knows what that looks like, the blip in the world map, so to speak. So anything further from members of council? All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you to our friends at Baker Tilly. We appreciate the presentation. The delegation from Ms. McQuaid was withdrawn. Madam Clerk, are there any citizens' comments? Sorry, Madam Clerk, are there any citizens' comments? No, thank you. Sorry, I was looking down. I didn't see you. Brings us to staff reports. First report is with regard to Northumberland Networks LP Municipal Access Agreement. Manager Gooding, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight, sir?
Through the mayor, no, or not.
You. I have a motion moved by Councillor Butwell, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that council enter into a municipal access agreement with Northumberland Networks LP to regulate access to construct, maintain, and operate a broadband network within the municipal right-of-ways. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. Next is an update bylaw to establish a property standards committee. Deputy Clerk, who is joining us by Zoom, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Thank you, Mr. No, not at this time.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wright. The council consider a bylaw to establish a property standards committee and to repeal bylaw number 074/2019 as included under the bylaws section of this agenda. Is there any discussion for members of council? All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Our next report is the CAO's ongoing report. CAO, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
No, Mr. Mayor, not at this time.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Butwell, that the CAO ongoing report and capital projects update be received. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Brings us to the mayor's reports. The first is with regard to the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative Conference. I have provided you with this report. I have nothing to add or highlight. Motion is moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that council accept the report from Mayor Ostrander and further that council authorizes the mayor's attendance at the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative Conference between May 14th and May 16th, 2025, inclusive in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, USA. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. If I'm allowed to cross the border. We'll see. Next is another report from me with regard to the Homelessness Task Force. You've all read the report. The motion is moved by Councillor McCausland, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon. The council received the report from Mayor Ostrander and further that council directs staff to develop terms of reference for the Homelessness Task Force for council's consideration at the February 18th council meeting. Is there any discussion? Councillor Wheeldon.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate seeing this. Yeah, I wholeheartedly support it.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion? Those in favor? Go ahead, Councillor Rowley.
I had both Councillor Wright and I were copied on an email earlier today from the CEO of the library. So will this be more of a local? I had kind of directed her to the county regarding the fact that Councillor Wheeldon keeps pretty much tabs on what goes on there. If we're going to have something more locally, could someone please reach out to the CEO?
We can do that. I imagine there'll be opportunity for inputs. I can't speak to what staff will do from a terms of reference perspective, but I imagine we'll want inputs from a number of groups and agencies in the community, or representatives thereof. So if the library has interest in that, I'm sure we can anticipate asking them or them asking us at the end of the day. Anything further from members of council? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Thank you all. There are no notices of motion or motions. That brings us to unfinished business. The only item listed is the motion which was withdrawn through the amendment with the dissolution of the provincial parliament by the Lieutenant Governor. Bill 241 has been dropped from the order paper, so that makes this this motion unfortunately not relevant until, or at least until we see what comes back with a new government. Brings us to bylaws. First is bylaw for interim tax levy 2025, moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Butwell. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to provide for an interim tax levy for 2025 and to provide for payment of taxes and to provide for penalty and interest. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Go ahead.
Just that I have received correspondence from a resident who received her first tax notice and thanked us for the thought and care we put into trying to keep that regulated. So residents recognize that we're doing okay on that.
There you go. Thank you. The next is a temporary borrowing bylaw for 2025. It's moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to authorize temporary borrowing from time to time to meet current expenditures during the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2025. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. Next is an access agreement bylaw with Northumberland Networks LP. It's moved by Councillor Butwell, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date. Being a bylaw to authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute a municipal access agreement between the Corporation of the Municipality of Brighton and Northumberland Networks LP to regulate access to construct, maintain, and operate a broadband network within the municipal rights of way. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Are there any opposed? That motion is carried. The next is a bylaw to establish a property standards committee. It's moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Rowley. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and passes on this date, being a bylaw to establish a property standards committee and to repeal bylaw number 074/2019. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. That brings us to reports, minutes of advisory committees of council and review teams. The first is both the Heritage Advisory Committee meeting of November 12th and the Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting of September 13th. With a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that council received the November 12th, 2024 Heritage Advisory Committee and the September 13th, 2024 Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting minutes as presented. Do either any of the representatives on these committees have anything to add for us or highlight for us? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. And a recommendation from the Environmental Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting of January 20th, 2025. Councillor Wheeldon, do you want to speak to this before I read the motion?
Sure. I mean, this relates to the delegation that came to council from Nature Canada, I want to say 2 months ago. And we did direct them to engage with the Sustainability Advisory Committee, and the Environmental Sustainability Advisory Committee did meet and do support this motion that Nature Canada has asked us to support with regard to the creation of a marine conservation area in Lake Ontario. I do want to request a small change that Prince Edward County be removed from the list of councils that would receive this as correspondence. They've got their own delegation going there and don't want to put the cart before the horse. So otherwise, the motion as written is what the Sustainability Advisory Committee has supported.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeldon. Councillor Wright, you're listed as the mover, and Deputy Mayor Anderson, you're listed as the seconder. Are you okay if we remove Prince Edward County from the list of municipalities we would send this to? Yeah. Yeah. And Councillor Wright, as the mover, will we be receiving or supporting the recommendation? You okay with that, Deputy Mayor? Thank you. So hang on, everyone. Here we go. It's moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that council support the recommendation to pass a motion regarding support for the National Marine Conservation Area for Lake Ontario and request for feasibility assessment. And whereas Lake Ontario is a vital natural resource, recreation, economic benefits, and critical habitat for numerous species, and whereas the Brighton area is home to unique cultural and historical sites such as the iconic Presqu'île Point Lighthouse and the HMS Speedy shipwreck, which represent significant heritage assets that contribute to local tourism and community identity. And whereas the establishment of a national marine conservation area under Parks Canada would ensure long-term protection and sustainable management of Lake Ontario's unique ecosystem, cultural heritage, and biodiversity while supporting tourism, economic opportunities, and traditional uses in harmony with conservation. And whereas Nature Canada made a representation to Brighton Council on November 18th, 2024, highlighting the ecological, cultural, and economic benefits of an NMCA for Lake Ontario and its surrounding communities. And whereas a feasibility assessment is necessary to evaluate the suitability of Lake Ontario for the establishment of a national marine conservation area, including the potential environmental, economic, and social impacts of such a designation. Now therefore be it resolved that the Council of the Municipality of Brighton endorses the establishment of a national marine conservation area for Lake Ontario to protect the lake's ecological health, support sustainable tourism, and preserve cultural heritage in the waters around Brighton, including local landmarks such as Presqu'île Point Lighthouse and the HMS Speedy Shipwreck. Requests that the federal and provincial governments commission a feasibility assessment to evaluate the potential for establishing an NMCA in the Lake Ontario region, including an assessment of the ecological, economic, and social implications of such a designation. Directs the Mayor and Council to write a letter to the Honourable Todd McCarthy, Acting Ontario Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks. The Honourable Stephen Guilbeault, Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change. The Honourable Andrea Kangin, Ontario Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. The Honourable Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, urging the provincial and federal governments to prioritize the creation of a national marine conservation area for Lake Ontario, commission a feasibility assessment to evaluate the viability of an NMCA in the region, commit to meaningful engagement and consultation with Indigenous communities, municipalities, local businesses, environmental organizations, academics and residents, and ensure the NMCA reflects the ecological, cultural, and economic values of the region. Direct staff to send a copy of this resolution to Philip Lawrence, Member of Parliament, Northumberland Peterborough South, David Pecuniary, Member of Provincial Parliament for the Northumberland Peterborough South, the Municipal Councils of Quinte West, Belleville, Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, First Nation, Deseronto, Loyalist Township, Greater Napanee, and Kingston, the Lower Trent Conservation Authority, and the Quinte Conservation Authority. Is there any discussion? Could we also add Northumberland County to that list?
I'd love that.
You okay with that as a mover? And you're okay as a seconder? And could we also add the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative? They would be strong advocates for something like this as well. Would that be okay as a mover, as a seconder? Madam Clerk, I have just put the initials for that. FYI. Councillor Rowley.
Should you then also add the Ganaraska Conservation Authority if we're including Northumberland going west?
Councillor Wheeldon.
The spaces that that Nature Canada is recommending for the marine conservation area really start at Brighton and move eastward. And so while Brighton is in Northumberland, there's nowhere west of Brighton that would have these designated spaces.
It's really sort of Presqu'île Bay and Bay of Quinte that's, and then, you know, down along the coast of Prince Edward County that they're recommending. Yeah. Anything further from members of council? A long but a good motion. All those in favor? There being none opposed, motion's carried. And a recommendation coming out of the Heritage Advisory Committee meeting of January 13th, 2025. Councillor Wright, would you like to speak to this before I read the motion?
There we go. Yes, like a lot of things with Bill 23 that came through, there's been a lot of hand tying in terms of what we are able to do with heritage properties and how fast we have to do them in the shorter timelines that were being offered. So this motion speaks to, or this support speaks to that.
Okay, I think that's the second motion I need to read that you're speaking of, which is the proceeding with the privately owned properties.
That's another thing that's coming up.
Okay. So
Yep.
first this, Thank you. Moved by Councillor Butwell, seconded by Councillor Wright. The council receive or support the correspondence from the Municipality of South Huron, and that this motion be forwarded to the Premier of Ontario, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Minister of Citizenship and Multiculturalism, Association of Municipalities of Ontario, municipal councils across the province, and MPP David Piccini. Councillor Butwell is the mover. Are we receiving or supporting?
See if we'll support this one.
The
I'm
recommendation,
not a fan of it.
the recommendation from the committee is to support, just FYI.
Support.
Yeah.
Okay, support.
You could withdraw your name from the motion if you prefer, and someone else could move it.
Yeah, that actually might be a good one. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a mover? Councillor Rowley, as the mover, are we receiving or supporting? Thank you. Councillor Wright, as the seconder, you're okay with that? Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion is carried. And the next is also a recommendation from the Heritage Advisory Committee. So before I read this motion, Councillor Wright, do you have anything to add or advise us of?
So the Heritage Committee is actually really starting to get some things accomplished, and that's part of what we're putting in front of you today. We have a property that we would like to begin the formal process of designating it to protect it. So this particular property has been found to have design and physical criteria, historical and associative value, contextual heritage value criteria. So there's a lot of good reasons to pull this house into a designation.
Thank you. The motion is moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that as recommended by the Brighton Heritage Advisory Committee, council support the recommendation to proceed with the designation of 28 Oranda Way, and the council authorizes proceeding with the designation of the privately owned property at 28 Oranda Way, Concession 9S, Part Lot 2, RP 38R 3259, Parts 1, 2, and 3, under Section 29, Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, RSO 1990, CO 18, as a property of cultural heritage value or interest such that the building and property receive protection under the law. Is there any discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Butwell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and through you to, I suppose, the committee member. Just if you could clarify for me and perhaps people who may be listening at home, what type of restrictions will be placed on that home, as well as do the property owners generally support this happening to their property? And not necessarily in this case, because that may be too specific, but what is the benefit to them, or does it actually hinder them from doing things with the property?
I think initially there's a fair bit of pushback because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what being designated means. This is just the start of the process. This doesn't mean that we are designating that house tonight. We're just starting the process so that we can approach the owner and start that process. Nope, nobody else is here. All right. Oh, there's Director Walsh. Director, could you speak to some of the things that happen when a house becomes designated, what that means specifically?
Through the Mayor to Council, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So the Heritage Conservation Act sets up the process, and that timeline has been compressed as has been described to the Council. But the first step is a drafting of a heritage designation bylaw, and the attachment to the bylaw lists the attributes for why the property is being considered for heritage purposes, and that might articulate things like the doors and the window design, the roof design, its placement on the property. It might get into cultural issues as well, such as what the significance of the property is in contributing to the culture of the municipality, i.e. who lived there and what they contributed to the municipality, or perhaps it might be more nefarious background, but which also carries forward the called folklore of the community. So anything that might enrich in the fabric of the community historically can be captured in that attributes listing. But in terms of the physical property and the buildings, at the time that someone wants to do a renovation to that building, then they need to demonstrate that they are maintaining the cultural attributes. And so if someone is replacing windows, this is a kind of a more common point of contention, is if someone's replacing the windows, then they really should be replacing the windows that are of the same design. So if it's a original wooden framed window and they're replacing it with something more energy efficient, typically they'll put in fillers around the frames to fit a off-the-shelf window. And that may not be necessarily heritage specific. So that's when some of these things can become an issue. So once that heritage bylaw is passed, if it is, and council receives a notice of the intention and supports it, then the property owner is contacted and saying, this is what we're looking at doing. Typically, we then look for the landowner support for that bylaw. And then if the owner doesn't support that bylaw, council has a decision to make subsequent as whether to continue on with that heritage bylaw or not. Some municipalities ingrain within their policy indicating that heritage designation bylaws will not be passed on a specific property if the owner is not in agreement with it. So we sometimes we'll take a look at what we can do to encourage such designation bylaws, i.e. tax deferrals and things like that as a financial incentive. Some chat among the committee is, and staff inclusive of that, is perhaps encouraging investment in these as short-term accommodation rentals, so that there'll be some additional revenues for which the owner can utilize in maintaining the property as long as they maintain it towards heritage conservation purposes. And so we can look at some of those things going forward, but for now we have this bylaw in front of us, and we, upon council's adoption of it, staff will give notice of intention to the owner, complete with a draft bylaw, see why it's been designated or the intention is to designate, and work with that owner to see if there can't be some support for a bylaw coming back to council for a final designation. And if it is designated, then it stays on our registry. We need to register it with the province. They have a heritage designation inventory that they track, and then the act now says that if something's been designated, the owner can ask for it to be removed as such. And so that's the process. I don't know that the property is currently listed. I think it's in a property of interest, and so that's what's brought before the committee. And the committee has done a very good job of taking inventory of the heritage attributes and have done a real nice description of why it should be designated.
Thank you, Director. Follow up?
Thank you very much, Director. So you mentioned about halfway through that if the homeowner objects, that the municipality may still designate it. What has been our practice to date if a homeowner objects to it? Do we impose that on them, or do we kind of back off a little bit and maybe just have it as a listed property?
Through the mayor to council, historically, if a property owner has objected to the idea of being designated, council has not passed a designation bylaw. That may change now with the new legislation, because once you have something listed, it has to be designated within, it was 1 year, but the new legislation was then again changed. I think it's now 2 years. Don't quote me on that, I should check. But now with the abbreviated timeframes and the weakness of a listing, there's more pressure on councils to make a decision one way or another about a designation. And so we'll work with the owner and go to those next steps and see what kind of decision council's needing to make once we learn that from the landowner. We're not aware of any imminent interest of this landowner to do any changes to the property. We've got a inventory of properties of interest, and the committee is working with that in hand and prioritizing which properties to then bring on as a potential designation. So there's no real risk to the property at this point in time, but we'll work with the owner and
Thank you.
see where we go.
Director. I think he's frozen. Follow up?
Hello.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Bowe.
Another follow-up. So in the case where we may have a rural property like this, may or may not have been in the family for a number of years, property is designated, say whether they would like it to or not, if council elects to designate it. In doing any of those upgrades, modifications, there would be an increased cost to those in all likelihood, because they would have to be specific to that property. Are there any funds that are made available to people so they don't experience undue hardship by something that's been imposed on them?
I think that's under discussion. Do you want to speak to that? Councillor Wright?
I think that's where the whole idea of potential tax deferrals come into play. There could be a fund set aside at some point to help assist homeowners with those kind of renovations if they're needed. So none of that is in place currently, but those are the potential ways we could go forward with it.
Has there been discussion about putting that into, like, making it a budgeted item so that there would be a support there?
Not so much at this point, I don't believe, but we're under a time constraint dealing with a list, because if we don't get properties designated within a certain amount of time, if they come off that list and they can't go back on the list. I think it's for 5 years is what the issue is, and we're on a ticking clock to get some of these designated before.
So
they
this one
expire.
is already on the list then?
Yeah, we're working with a list of, what is it, about 80 properties, Director Walsh?
I think it's somewhat fewer than that, but there is a very handsome list there, yes, and a worthwhile list.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of council? Director Walsh, do we have a this do we have any policies around this? And if so, how restrictive are our policies with regard to the repair and maintenance of heritage properties?
We do have a policy in place. Part of our policy manual, there's an inclusion of what process we'll undertake to designate a property, and I think Jessica actually might have that more readily available than I have right now. She reviewed that with the committee last day, but with the legislative changes, then that might be a little bit of a dated policy, but we can follow that process, and the act lays down the process in itself. So we'll simply follow those timelines in the legislation.
Yeah, I'm less worried about the length of time, or the length of time it would take to list or not list a property than I am with how restrictive any policy we have is with regard to how someone may or may not maintain their property or repair their property. Are they required to use, if they have 100-year-old window panes, are they required to source 100-year-old window panes if they're replacing their windows, et cetera, et cetera? I know that some communities are very strict with how heritage properties are maintained, but I think there's some leeway in there from the legislative point of view, and I just don't know if Brighton has policies around that yet.
No, not specifically, and I don't think we could ever have so many policies as to be prescriptive for every type of heritage designated building, because it is a very design detailed process. So we would normally ask if someone is doing a renovation that we would ask for a heritage impact assessment. And so the heritage people would have to get together and take a look at what's permitted, what's not, what's acceptable, what's not. In the case of an example of windows, I don't think they would be so demanding as to the actual glass not changing, but and even the frames, it can be a new window, but it ends up being essentially a custom window. And it's particularly an issue, say, for an arched window. So if you had a segmented brick arch above a window that of a historic dimension, they just don't make them anymore. So it's essentially a custom window, and they can become quite expensive. So the only real specifications would be that it fits the frame as originally designed, and materiality. Is it going to be a vinyl window? No, it really should probably be wood. But in terms of the actual glass, that, you know, uh, there's more flexibility on that to my experience and observation. But I would probably leave it to the heritage individuals to advise us.
The deputy clerk had something to say as well around that. Deputy clerk?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, and further to Director Walsh's comments, the policy that is currently in place is outdated, absolutely, and is one of the many that we are working towards updating. That said, the policy doesn't touch on, let's say, the rules of what can and can't be done with a heritage property. That is more legislated and falls under the bylaw if a property is designated. Currently, the goal of the committee is to have council approve moving forward so that they can, by policy, approach the owner and engage with the owner to see whether or not first steps if they're interested, and then if not, then council would need to decide whether they would like to pass a designation bylaw or not based on those findings.
Thank you for that. I just want to make sure that whatever we do, we're not being overly restrictive for homeowners and their ability to maintain their homes in a way that is frankly more energy efficient and maybe cheaper in the long run. I have no issue with designating homes or protecting heritage valued homes in the community, which doesn't always mean old homes, as noted. But I don't want to be too prescriptive and restrictive about how landowners can repair and maintain their own homes. So thank you very much. I'm getting the sense that we're early stages in all of this, and we'll all pay close attention when those policies come forward. Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Babwell.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. So understanding that policies are going to be reviewed, this is like a moving target. Would it not make more sense to have those in place so that the homeowner actually knows what they'll be dealing with before the questions are asked about whether they'd be willing to?
I don't disagree with you. It
Mhm.
may be a bit of cart before the horse, but I think the legislation is sort of pushing the cart before the horse here in terms of the timelines that our Heritage Committee is under to make sure that these properties that are on a list are in fact designated. So I think moving forward, we'll see that happen, but only so much time in a day from a committee, volunteer committee perspective too.
Yeah, and understand that there seems to be a period, if it's not done within a certain time frame, then they kind of fall back to second position. And then 5 years or
Yeah, they
six.
get removed entirely from the list, so they
They
don't
can.
even they're not on anyone's radar.
Mhm.
So now a committee has to go back out into the community and, figure out which home should be designated heritage or not. So
Mhm.
I support what the committee's doing. They're taking an
Absolutely.
existing list, they're trying
Yeah.
to figure out what, who's who in the zoo
Yeah.
and then, I think they've also got this recognition that in this process, we also need to get updated and modernized policies around this. So I anticipate that we'll see that come forward from this group as well before too long.
And anybody who knows me in the business that I do, the special homes have that special place in my heart. And I try to reiterate to people that they do not own the home owns them, and they are simply caretakers for the next person. So I absolutely support exactly what the committee is looking to do. I just don't want it to be so heavy-handed that a private homeowner is dictated to after the fact when they purchased a property, not having these rules in place on them, suddenly imposed on them in what can be a very heavy-handed process if they are not open to it.
And so we will look to our council rep to take that back to the committee when they're offering advice to council, because we don't want a bunch of back and forth with regard to a policy if we can get it done right the first time. Councilor Wright.
I would say I have not had that sense of wanting to have that kind of heavy-handedness come down on homeowners. We want to make this as easy for them as possible so that we can preserve the homes that we do have. So I think going forward, yeah, we definitely need to look at policies, and the committee can certainly help assist staff with that as they go forward.
Thank you for that. Councilor McCausland. You're good now. Councilor Rowley.
Thank you. Is this the only option? I believe that previously there would be like just a registry where it would kind of be just a very relaxed kind of idea as to where these homes could be. Having just sat through some of this in a different township regarding a heritage building, the group I was involved with, we did push back and it was left alone. So hopefully those kind of things can maybe happen here too. But I don't disagree with a registry. I have the same idea as far as tying one's hands to what we like or don't like.
I appreciate that comment, but I think what we've heard is that the legislation is forcing the hand of heritage committees to push councils to make a decision one way or the other. Councilor Wright.
Our original deadline was supposed to have been last month. And we had that pushed back through support of, I think, multiple councils across Ontario to get it pushed to January of this coming year. And we have a registry of addresses that we would like to potentially see, but we can't get them on. If we don't get them designated by that date, they fall off the registry and they can't be put back on the registry for 5 years. So that's why there's that concern.
Councilor Betwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to Councillor Wright. So the properties that have been identified and that are on this kind of like backlog list that we're trying to move forward, have they all been notified? Have the committee approached them? So are they? This is basically going to be them being told this is happening versus a collaborative approach moving towards it, having the committee or whomever be able to go into the home. There could be things in the home as well, rather than just getting them off on a reserve list for the sake of basically reserving them.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is essentially the first step to that collaborative process. As the Heritage Committee, we can't just approach anybody. It has to be approved by council and go through staff.
And I understand what you're saying. It would be great if we could do this in a collaborative way and have everybody, sort of holding hands and saying, yay, let's list this property. We're all in support. But the legislation tells us how we go, and it feels a little
And I
backward.
appreciate that the homes are part of the collective community. They're important, but they are also a private homeowner's property. So anyway, I'll reserve judgment till I suppose later.
Thank you all. Anything further from members of council? All in favor? Any opposed? The motion is carried. And we have a recommendation from the Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting of January 16th. Councillor Wheeldon, do you have anything to note on this before I read the motion?
I do, Mayor. Thank you. This is just a Another mention of our obligation to be as accessible as possible by 2025. And since it is in fact 2025, it struck the Accessibility Advisory Committee that we have a CIP that supports improved accessibility downtown, but it is not yet funded. And so we should put some money in that account. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Butwell, that council support the recommendation from the Accessibility Advisory Committee to add $25,000 to the 2025 budget to fund the accessibility function of the Community Improvement Plan, and that council directs staff to add $25,000 to the 2025 budget to fund the accessibility function of the Community Improvement Plan. Is there any discussion? Councillor Rowley.
I guess I'll wait till budget time for a bigger explanation.
Councillor Wheeldon.
I should add that putting money in the account doesn't necessarily mean that we spend it. The community improvement plan would require a downtown business owner to submit an application for that funding as a way of supporting a project they have to make their shop more accessible or their building more accessible. And I know we have a few different CIPs that we've been setting aside money for that don't necessarily have a ton of uptake, but we want to make sure that there's money there when someone does apply. So designating the money doesn't mean spending it.
But designating it does mean taxing for it so that we have the money in the pot. CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just for clarification, I want to be cautious in the wording of this motion, just in light of Councillor Wright's Councillor Rowley's comments. Are you looking to have this added? We could allocate it in the budget as a pre-approval, or we could put it in for February 7th for discussion. There's a number of items that you will discuss that day to determine whether or not you want them in or out. So I just want to be cautious that the way it's written, it is perceived as pre-approval as opposed to discussion on the 7th. So just some clarification on where council wants to go.
If we add for deliberation at the end of the last sentence, that works. Would that be okay with everyone? Councillor Wheeldon as the mover?
I think that as much as that makes sense, was not necessarily the intent of the committee, which wants to see that approved.
So you are not in support of putting for deliberation as the mover?
It makes sense to say for deliberation, and we'll have this conversation again on the 7th, probably either way. But I do want to respect the desire of the committee to make sure that it is funded. So I'm going to say not okay with adding for deliberation, but looking for the commitment.
Understood. Any other comments or questions from members of council? Councillor Rowley?
Was that Councillor Wheeldon's motion? Or
It is, but it doesn't stop anyone from amending it.
So I would like to amend it then to add the word for deliberation on the 7th, as I would like a bit more explanation as to exactly what the plans, when you say for CIP for downtown specifically. And I would just maybe have some commentary about that, but I would like to then wait for the 7th for that. Thank you.
So moved by Councillor Rowley that the motion be amended to add, for deliberation. Is there a seconder? Any discussion on the motion? The amending motion? All those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion is carried. We return to the original motion as amended. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. All right. That brings us to Accessibility Advisory Committee Chair Report to Council regarding committee goals for 2025. It's my understanding that the chair of the Accessibility Committee would like to report on her report, and if that's acceptable to members of council, we will proceed. Are there any objections? There being none, welcome. Chair of Rieswick.
Hello, everyone. Let me put that up a bit more so you can hear me.
We trust you will be brief.
It's short. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, CAO, councillors, and staff for letting me come and speak to you guys today. I'm Nicole Vrieswick. I'm chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and I wanted to come personally on behalf of the committee to talk to you guys just about the goals, why we wanted specific goals this year, but also to advocate for the accessibility needs of our community. I see the committee as having two purposes. First is improving accessibility awareness in the community, but it's also to work with council to support municipality within the our municipal boundaries in all areas of the AODA, including customer service, employment, transportation, information and communication, and public spaces. So our first goal is to advocate to the Municipality of Brighton for the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act and for compliance for that. Jessica is wonderful at bringing all the things that need to be done forward to us so we can help support them being done. It is surprising how the AODA states everything needs to be accessible by 2025, and yet it's not. It's an interesting system, but we'll keep moving forward with that. And I look forward to seeing if there's going to be any communication regarding that in the future from the government. Our second goal is also to continue to improve accessibility in our community and awareness. We always run an awareness event at the end of May for National Accessibility Awareness Week, and we'll be doing that again this year. And as well, the library, Heather comes and sits in on our committees as well, and she's having a guest speaker come in the end of February as well, who has a book about having a disability. We'd like to review past accessibility plans for completion. I know I've been on the committee for 12 years, and every few years we had a new document for a new plan and a new plan and a new plan and lots of things listed. I just don't know if we've ever gone back to say, did we actually accomplish all of those things or not? Because they keep changing, but we never really go back and do a summary. So I'm planning on doing that. Our number 4 goal is to increase communications between staff and the committee regarding project and developments for accessibility advice from the committee. We strive to be a committee that not just receives and makes recommendations on complaints about accessibility from the community. And I think sometimes we end up just keep getting complaints from the community and we bring them forward and we bring them forward. But I think our committee is supposed to be more than that. We're supposed to be working together with staff on projects, on official plans, on things like that. So one of our goals is to try to be more proactive and provide timely and constructive advice when official plans or projects are being completed. There are accessibility building standards that are already there. There's building codes there that say exactly where grab bars should be. But sometimes talking with people with disabilities is more important to sort of say, hey, where do you actually want it? Because yeah, the standards are from here to here, but sometimes right in the middle is best. And I think those are the people we need to ask those questions to. And that's what our committee is. And then our 5th goal is to attend more accessibility related professional development workshops. Since COVID, there hasn't really been a lot available, but we would like to even do something like that, even partner with the other municipalities in Northumberland and do something jointly within Northumberland potentially. So additionally, Councillor Wheeldon has already brought forward about advocating during budget time. I think we've talked in our committee about individual departments having their own separate pot for accessibility. When something breaks, when something needs updating, then they don't have to come to council or put in their budget for next year for accessibility. If they each had their own little pot towards accessibility, those things can get fixed right away or done right away versus waiting. And then the second part of funds is speaking toward the community improvement fund as well. For instance, downtown, there's a lot of places that still have steps to go in, and they're rented places, right? They're not business-owned places. So sometimes the landlords aren't going to fix those. Something like that fund, a business owner can apply to look at getting a ramp in towards their business, and then they have a ramp there, something like that. So I think that's something that we envision where that money can go towards to support the downtown accessibility. So yeah. That's all. Thank you for letting me speak. And I don't know, are people allowed to ask questions or not?
Oh, yes, they are.
Oh, okay.
When you get up there in front of the microphone. Oh, thank you for your presentation. Appreciate that very much. Are there any questions of clarification from members of council? Councillor Rowley.
Thank you very much, Nicole. How are you? As a representative of the DBIA, I would suggest maybe talking to one or two of the shop owners. There are ramps downtown. People just need to be able to know where they are and where to get them. But there are ramps that have already been purchased by, I don't know if they're individual business owners or by the DBIA, but there are things there. So I'm sure that could be a small help to kind of start your ball rolling. I'll leave it for that.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Councillor Wheeldon.
I just wanted to take a moment to thank Nicole for being an excellent chair of the committee. You've been at this a very long time, and I really appreciate how you keep our meetings moving and focused. And I really admire and respect your dedication. So thank you for your service.
Thank you for that. Councillor Rowley.
I'll just make comments on, I believe, Mayor, you and I sat on the first accessibility committee in 2006 to 2010. And I should say at that time, not a whole lot maybe has changed because it was complaint driven at that point as well. So I think your committee has made great strides, but there are some things that never change.
I think that's just a factor of lack of resources at the end of the day. It's a lot easier to be proactive if you have all the resources and a lot harder if you don't. So time and money, that's what gets in our way all the time. So here we go. Anything else from members of council? Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. It's moved by Councillor McCausland, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that council receive the report from the chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee regarding the committee's goals for 2025. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. And minutes from the Intermunicipal Task Force on Housing and Homelessness. Councillor Wheeldon, anything to add here before I read the motion?
I'll just summarize briefly the update. So we have selected February 28th for a housing solutions workshop that will bring together stakeholders from across the sector, from vacant land to keys in hand. So including planners and politicians certainly, but also developers, builders, realtors, lenders, with the idea of running a process analysis workshop where we can split up into groups or tables that will tackle the entire process of building housing and examine every step of the way to look at how could this be faster, how could it be cheaper, how could it be more efficient, examining everything. You know, there are no sacred cows or assumptions. So it will be a very interesting event that at the very least will get everybody on the same page about what everybody else does in that process and hopefully provide a lot of solutions. We've identified Monica Turner as the facilitator of the event. She's done some great work in the sector identifying just what kind of housing starts we have in Northumberland over the last few years. And there are almost no actual purpose-built rentals coming in, almost no actual affordable by any stretch housing coming in. And so hopefully through this kind of workshop, we can change that. Members of the task force have been organizing and reaching out within their respective communities. The event itself will be hosted in Alnwick-Haldimand at the Haldimand Civic Center, or Alnwick Civic Center rather. And looking forward to it.
Time of day?
It's going to be an all-day thing. It is not, I should say, it is not an open to the public event. It is, we do have a tight guest list, but of course you would be welcome, Mayor.
Good. I'm not sure if I'm even available, but if I am, I might pop my head in.
The goal is to make sure that we have manageable size of groups so that we don't have 15 breakout groups to manage.
If the pros are invited and going, I'd be happy to let them have at it at the end of the day. I will note also on your, let me read the motion first. Thank you for that, Councillor Wheeldon. The motion is moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that Council receive the Intermunicipal Task Force on Housing and Homelessness summary of January 16, 2025 meeting as information. Is there any discussion? I will note that item 3.3 of this update notes that there's an AI in government conference in Port Hope on the same day we're having our budget meeting. But if there's anyone from this municipality that we can send, I would encourage that we do so. Apparently, it's going to be quite well presented, according to the mayor of Port Hope. Anyone else? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Is anyone else extremely hot? Is there anyone who can manage the facilities in this room? I know you're not. And every time I feel extremely warm, I am reminded of former Councillor Fredis, who would be just barely comfortable now. No, probably not. I'm not asking you to turn the air conditioning on. No, it's blizzarding outside. I get that. Moving. Thank you. Okay. Reports, minutes of statutory committees, boards, and external agencies. First comes from DBIA. With a motion moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor McCausland, that Council receive the DBIA meeting minutes for June 13th, September 12th, November 14th, and December 21st, 2024 as presented. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And that takes us to correspondence, direction items, endorsements, communications, and petitions. The first comes from a request from the Presqu'île Pirates for an ice rental reduction. It's moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that Council support the request from the Presqu'île Pirates for a reduction of ice rental fee for a tournament scheduled on Saturday, March 22nd, 2025. Is there any discussion? All in favor? It says it supports for a reduction of ice rental fee. I assume that would mean that we'd want to, the clerk is asking how much. And my assumption by simply passing this motion is that we're waiving the fee. The ice, we have a season-ending tournament booked, and the ice rental is $13.71. We're inquiring about a reduced fee for that date, so they're not asking for a specific reduction. Does council mind if I ask one of the gents in the audience who's clearly wearing a Presqu'île Pirates outfit what they'd like us to do? If you could come forward, we have people on Zoom and YouTube who can't hear you unless you push that button there. There you go, sir.
So I just want to clarify, just in case some people think like the apparel that we're wearing, or you'll see 60, probably more fellas wearing it around. We all buy our own stuff. So anything that I don't want to say fundraise, but we play hockey and we got about 60 guys that pay full up for the ice, or 40. And if you can't make it, you have to call in, and then the guy that comes in and subs in, he pays $15. So that's how we raise all our money to donate to the causes that you can see. So our year-end tournament, we have 40 people playing. We have $40 per player. And whatever we don't spend on the ice time is donated to basically strictly in Brighton. So whatever council sees fit, we didn't want to put a number on it because, you know, we're not the only show in town, probably looking for some help. So.
Thank you. Councillor Rowley is the mover.
Thank you. So, Mr. DeWall, if you've got 40 people at $40, that's $1,600.
Yeah.
And if we were to charge you almost $1,400, leaves very little for you to donate. I would much rather see those dollars support the very needy causes that we have in this community. So I'm willing to kind of just do it for nothing, but I'm only one of 7.
But you are the mover.
And I will just say that we give it for nothing.
So we support the request from Presqu'île Pirates and waive. Deputy Mayor, are you okay with that? Deputy Mayor Anderson, are you okay with waiving the fee? Thank you. Yeah. And waive. So it now says, support the request and waive the ice rental fee for a tournament scheduled for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Moved by Councillor Rowley, second by Deputy Mayor Anderson. Any further discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
You sell your hats? I'd like one.
The next is a county correspondence regarding municipal restructuring study. It's moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Butwell, that council support the resolution and report from Northumberland County regarding municipal restructuring study. Is there any discussion? Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you, Mayor. Are you able to speak to this a little bit? And I know I've heard you on the radio speaking about it. I know you're prepared.
Sure. I have no illusions that this would result in any sort of dissolution of the lower tiers or even the upper tier or whatever other things might be going on out there in the world. I think there's an opportunity for the lower tiers and the upper tier to find common cause and possibly amalgamate departments, possibly find better efficiencies. I know. I could say pivot. That's even worse, isn't it? At the end of the day, I say that far too often, I realize. I think there's very few services that we actually duplicate. Roads might be one of them. Back office supports are another, from IT to finance, et cetera. But there's very few overlaps. So, when we look at what we could amalgamate, are there opportunities? Does everyone have a certain department that maybe? Yeah, I think there's opportunities to look at these things. And the question always becomes, if we were to amalgamate a department or upload or download a service, would there be any savings found? And I think that's why we need to ask someone to come in and take a look at these things under a bit of a microscope. Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you, Mayor. I will say that we've had similar conversations around the Accessibility Committee table and the JEDI Committee table. I know that the town of Coburg had a staff member who was specifically their role was promoting accessibility and diversity, equity, and inclusion. They presented to our committees here, helping us sort of learn the ropes as we started the JEDI Committee. That was a really positive thing. And we said, is this something that the deputy clerk can handle all on her own? Based on the restrictions of our resources, it must be, but we've had the conversation of, well, what if we went in with Trent Hills or Crammy or something like that to have a resource for all of us rather than hoping to borrow the Coburg staff person from time to time.
And I think those are the exact kind of discussions that we need to have, whether it's sharing service among all 7 municipalities or 1, 2, or 3 can do those shared services. We had discussion around sharing senior management at one point with another municipalities a couple of years ago, and that fell through. It didn't work out, but at least the outreach happened, and the opportunities were actually discussed. So. We do an awful lot of sharing of services or uploading of the things. Communications from a firefighting perspective is one of those things. It was originally every municipality paid for their own, and once all 7 were paying the same service, county council decided it would be more appropriate that cost be put on the county levy rather than billing out each of the 7 municipalities, because the taxpayer pays for it anyway. Another example is because of the way policing is done across the county of Northumberland, Coburg Police Service is the police service that is required to do court security, because that's where the county's courthouse is. Well, that's not really fair at the end of the day, and so the county helps pay for that cost for court security, and was the whole impetus for that policing study. If we're paying for this, then should we look at other opportunities? We know where that went. That's another story, but at least that study is available to any of the either of the 2 municipalities with their own local force if they're looking to make some changes. So we'll see where all that goes. But lots of opportunities, lots of discussion. I know the CAO's table is robustly having some of these discussions as on an ongoing basis, but this would provide some meat on the bone to have a good discussion around. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion's carried. Next is the City of Welland resolution for support regarding provincial and federal government to consider redistributing a portion of the land transfer tax. It's moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Rowley, that council support or receive the City of Welland resolution for support regarding provincial and federal government to consider redistributing a portion of the land transfer tax and GST collected from property sales to municipalities. Councillor Wright, are we supporting or receiving? And you're okay with that, Councillor Rowley? Any discussion? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion's carried. Next is correspondence from the town of Halton Hills, with a motion moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Butwell, that council receive or support the town of Halton Hills resolution number 2025-0010 regarding the sovereignty of Canada. Councillor Wright, are we receiving or supporting? Councillor Butwell, are you okay with that? Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That motion is carried. And takes us into FYI correspondence. First is correspondence from me to you. Moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that council receive the email correspondence from Mayor Ostrander to council regarding committees and boards. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. And the next is from Mr. Tonkin with regard to Brighton stage productions, moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor McCausland, that council received the email correspondence from Bruce Tonkin regarding Brighton stage productions as information. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That motion's carried. And from the OPP Detachment Board, it's the meeting minutes. It's moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wright. The council received the Northumberland OPP Detachment Board meeting minutes, November 15th, 2024, OPP report for November-December 2024, traffic report for November-December, and the Northumberland OPP Detachment Board Chair and end of year report for 2024 for information. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Brings us to question period. Is there anyone in the gallery who has a question with anything that appeared on this evening's agenda? And there's none noted. And we have nobody on Zoom for that purpose. We have no closed session this evening. I have a motion moved by Councillor McCausland, seconded by Councillor Wheeldon, that council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date. Being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Corporation of the Municipality of Brighton Council meeting held on February 3rd, 2025. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. And finally, a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that the February 3rd, 2025 meeting adjourn at 8:18 p.m. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That motion's carried. Thank you, everyone. Drive safely home, especially tonight.